Started with these really incredible all-star guests. We are so grateful to be here to learn from them and to have this conversation. So we have first next to me Farah Barqawi, who is a Palestinian author, performer, educator, and feminist organizer. Her poetry and essays have appeared in multiple languages on online platforms and in very many anthologies. She produced and hosted in 2019 a season of the Arabic podcast Abe, Shame, which means shame. She wrote and performed her solo piece, Baba Come to Me. She is the co-founder of two feminist projects, Wiki Gender and the Uprising of Women in the Arab World. She teaches Intro to Creative Writing for undergrads at New York University, where she is also a candidate for an MFA in Nonfiction Creative Writing. Next to her is Sarah Aziza, a Palestinian-American writer and translator. Her journalism, poetry, essays, and experimental nonfiction have appeared in the New Yorker, Harper's, The Intercept, The Nation, Democracy Now!, and many other outlets, I should say. She is the recipient of grants and fellowships, including Fulbright, the Pulitzer, and the Asian American Writers Workshop, and Tin House Books. But most excitingly, she has a forthcoming book, which is a hybrid work of memoir, lyricism, and oral history that explores the intertwined legacies of diaspora, colonialism, and the American dream. So make sure to be looking out for that upcoming book. And to her right, we have Sharif Abdel Kouddous, who is an independent print and television journalist based in New York and Cairo. He has reported from across the Arab world, including from the Gaza Strip. He received a George Polk Award for his investigation into the killing of Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, a really great film, I suggest, an Emmy Award for his coverage of the Trump administration's Muslim travel ban, and an Izzy Award for his coverage of the 2011 Egyptian Revolution. So we're gonna get right. Yeah, round of applause. Honestly, round of applause for these incredible guests. Wow, a lot of talent on the stage. Okay, so we're gonna start with the first question, and I'll go to you first, Farah, and then first Farah, and then down the line for this one. So what are you hearing? We see a lot, and we see very little in the mainstream media, and then we see more in independent media and Arab media and on social media accounts. But what are you hearing from people on the ground in Gaza that maybe we aren't seeing?
Hi everyone, glad that I'm here with you, sharing this stage, surrounded by people who care. On a personal level, my mother and my maternal family are all in Gaza, or mostly in Gaza. So between the north side and the south, some had to be displaced, some refused. So what I'm hearing is like mostly family news, family reportage from the field, and it's definitely different to hear it from a close person. So I watch like the news and also follow independent reportage and citizen journalism and all of that, but definitely calling my mother specifically and getting day-to-day, if I could get in touch day-to-day or whenever, like updates, mainly now on food, literally, like it's if they have food or not, if they ate or not. So it's kind of ridiculous because the connections are better than before, but it's like having a mobile phone and connection to the world, but not really the basic material to stay alive, to be able to be connected to the world. So it's kind of like everything is reversed. Like priorities, as usual, are, you don't know what keeps a human life and what keeps a cause alive and all of that. So yeah, and through my Instagram page, I receive dispatches from her as well. She writes on her phone, and whenever she has connection, she sends me, and I edit them and publish them online. So there are like daily updates specifically from Gaza City, which is most of where my news are coming from.
Right.
Yeah, so food. Today she visited her apartment, and it's in a building that is partially damaged, not fully damaged, and she found a huge rat because like there are the windows are not there, so she's like, that was the news from today, that she found a rat in the house. And she also found, she discovered that they forgot a bag of rice under one of the cabinets. In the beginning of the genocide, she had turned my bookshelves when I was young into the storage for food, because they were buying more to store, and she had families with her at home displaced. So she found a bag of rice. She's like, I found a bag of rice, so that was like a gift, kind of, because there is no rice nowadays. This is what I'm hearing.
Right, there's no food, and if you can access food, it's extremely expensive, right?
It is very, very expensive. It is, there is some, of course, there will always be something, but you can't afford it, even if we're not yet at the stage of there is nothing, but what is there, it's either there's food and no money to afford it, or there is money, but there is no food, or basic stuff to be consumed.
You want to go on?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, like Farah said, I'm really grateful to be here and grateful to see folks who want to come out on Thursday and think about Gaza. Yeah, I also have family in Gaza. It's my paternal side. I speak when I can, most days, to my cousin, who's 28. He's a pharmacist. He's been displaced multiple times. They live in Nusrat refugee camp, which is sort of central, a little bit to the north, and they left about 6 weeks ago. I don't know what time it is, maybe 2 months ago. They were ordered to evacuate multiple times. They finally, fearing for their lives, ended up just relocating down to Khan Yunis. And I don't know if you all remember the news coming out of Khan Yunis a few months ago. It was November, I believe. Really terrifying. I was getting voice notes with the sounds of tanks and bombs going off very, very close. And they were like goodbye notes. Like, we talk every day. They know death is near, you know. Anything happens, but we know it's near at any time, but these were actually like goodbye, I think. So that was pretty awful. They went down to Rafah after that, and then out of fear for their lives, they just went back to Nusrat. Actually, they figured nothing's safe, so we might as well go home. Go be in our home. So yeah, what we're talking about now is more food as well. 2 days ago they had eggs for the first time. They splurged and they spent a lot of money to get eggs. There's 10 in their immediate family, and there's about 30 of them all living in one house. So he didn't say how many eggs to the 30 people. I don't know if everyone had their own.
The box has 30 eggs usually, and in Gaza City they got 30 eggs for $60. So that makes $2 per one egg.
And that would be expensive here. But we're thinking about
it's like 10 eggs,
prices.
10 eggs for $20. It's more than, it has to be super organic, coming from space situation for America.
Boutique, yeah. So yeah, I mean, every day we try and get a hold of them, and the first thing we say is alhamdulillah, but it's hard.
Well, I don't have family in Gaza. I'm from Egypt, but I've been to Gaza many times as a reporter, and the person I'm in touch with the most at the moment is someone who worked with journalists, mostly foreign journalists, in Gaza. They're usually called fixers, although I don't like that term, but he works as a translator as well for a lot of international medical organizations. His name is Mohammed Rajab. I last saw him in Gaza in 2018, in May, during the Great Marches of Return, when Israeli snipers shot in one day over 1,100 Palestinians who were engaged in unarmed protest while the US Embassy was being transferred to Jerusalem. Muhammad, like so many others in Gaza, has been displaced to Rafah with his family, his young children, his wife. and his parents. And he's an incredibly brave person, but he now has decided he needs to leave because he needs to keep his family safe, which was a very difficult decision for him. And so, like so many others, he's forced into this dystopian reality where he has to crowdfund his own displacement, because Egypt has now has a system where Egyptian intelligence is basically profiting, and we can talk about this later, where you have to pay thousands of dollars to get on a list to be approved to cross the Rafah border crossing into Egypt. This was a long-standing reality where to get out of Gaza took days or weeks or months to get on this list, and you could pay $350, $400 for like what's called coordination, tansiq. But since October 7th, it's now $5,000 for an adult and $2,500 for a child. And so if you have a family, we're basically trying to raise $70,000 for Muhammad and his family and relatives. And yeah, so that's the person I'm in touch with, and yeah, it's heartbreaking that that's the dystopian reality that we're in, and as an Egyptian, one feels complicit. It's obviously, Egyptian people are in solidarity with Palestine, but the Egyptian government is very much not.
Right. Right, and I can only imagine $70,000, what that is, I mean, compared to the currency that people make money in. I mean, it's,
yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone's seen all these GoFundMes that Palestinians are trying to raise money, and you can also go pay and not get on the list, and the money's gone.
The money's gone.
Yeah, my cousin asked me today, actually, like, what do you think? Do you think you could help me start a GoFundMe? That's really heartbreaking.
Wow. Okay, so Gaza is at the crossroads. Well, I'll start by saying we often think about Gaza as open air prison, but let's like expand beyond that, right? So Gaza is at the crossroads of Africa and Asia, and it has a quite rich and interesting history. And now its preservation is really at stake, with 70% of the homes in the strip, and over half of the buildings having been destroyed or demolished totally, bulldozed, in some cases. So Farah, talk about the history, culture, and beauty of Gaza, and about what daily life was like just up until October.
Yeah, it's a very complex place, because as we've seen in the movie also, Gaza's buildings and spaces and everything has been like changing every 2 years, and not because of progress or like new technologies, but because of new technologies of destruction that are used against it. So the last time I was in Gaza was just before 2021, May 2021 war. I was visiting for the first time in 9 years, and then my cousin, she was an architect, and she worked with the heritage committee at the Ministry of Tourism. There is not really tourism, but they're trying to keep these old buildings. And she took me on a tour, actually, in Gaza city, to see many places that are not existing now anymore. Al-Umari Mosque, it's one of the oldest mosques in Palestine and in the region.
It was the first mosque built in Gaza.
Yeah, and exactly, it's very beautiful, very
600 AD.
Yeah, very, very beautiful mosque. It's just it's something similar to all the places people want to visit in Jerusalem or something, but it exists in Gaza and no one can see it because it's in Gaza. We also went to near my high school, which is Zahra secondary school, which is very close to where the British ruler used to be, like the offices, and my school was my mother's school too. That's why I went to it. I was in a private school before, in the Latin Patriarchate School, which is now besieged, like the church. But I wanted to be in my mom's school for the last year of high school, and that school was like also one of the oldest, because it's in Shijaiya neighborhood and it's in the heart of the old city of Gaza. And it was always full of, this school, for example, was like full of strong girls who used to lead a protest since the 60s, like Mom being one of them, and many student movements came out of this area. And Zahra school was, during this genocidal war, became another displacement center, and I don't know really what happened to it, because it was one of the places that when Shijaiya was surrounded recently, they emptied it also and centered in it, the soldiers. So I don't know what kind of damage happened to that place. So we have Al-Umari, we have the Samara Hammam, which is like a Turkish hammam or a Moroccan hammam. It's an Arabic hammam place. This also, like Gaza is a city, is an Arab city, like all Arab cities, having the market, the market that has like covered market from the sun, and it has the gold merchants, and all of these places. I didn't personally, as a kid, before I left, I didn't go on my like alone there, because I was a school kid. And when I returned in May 2021, my cousin took me as an adult, like, let's take a tour in the city. And we also went to the port. The port was newly like finished, even improved from what you saw. Now also not really there. And I mean, beauty is blended with missing places and replaced places, and then I didn't recognize some streets, but people keep rebuilding life, so there are new cafes and new, like, the younger women have different habits, and they, like, things are rebuilt themselves. It's life, after all, and to me, this is the beauty, that people are alive, and maybe because I'm outside, I feel, maybe being outside always feels like, oh, I have more freedom, I have better exposure, but then seeing how people are actually making do with what they have, and they really enjoy these small pleasures of, they have a hammam, and they have a beautiful historic place, and they have libraries, and they are rebuilding some homes in old Gaza. And unfortunately, now again, everything is destroyed. And actually, in that war, 2 weeks after I left, the war happened in May 2021, and I lost my cousin, that cousin. And the thing that broke my heart the most is when Omari Mosque was demolished, just because, for me, that was the last thing that I witnessed with her. And it was also gone. Like, I wanted it to stay because she loved it so much, and she's an architect, and she told me a lot about it, and I lost her, and then the memory of walking there, even, something like that.
I'm so sorry for the loss. Okay, Sarah, in a recent essay in Lux titled "Gaza's Past is Calling," you write, "Gaza for me means teeming, a cruel over-concentration of bodies, yes, but at the same time, one of the world's densest points of human love." Can you explain that a little further? Unpack it.
Sure. I'm still catching my breath. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's hard. Right, I know. I mean, it's always this delicate balance when writing about Gaza or Palestine or any marginalized or oppressed peoples. Like you don't want to reduce them to their oppression and the worst things that have happened to them or to us, but you also don't want to romanticize it. So, I mean, I guess in that sentence I was trying to just sort of capture the paradox of Palestine in general, and then Gaza as I know it from my loved ones that live there or grew up there. My father grew up there, but I unfortunately had to be graced with a, American citizenship. That was my father's gift to me, and also a bit of a curse. It made it impossible up until this point for me to go to Gaza, so I haven't been there. But what I do know, or what I can extrapolate from all the Gazans that I know, all the people from Gaza that I know, is just the incredible intermeshment, if that's a word, of life. There's an interdependency and a generosity that I witness from the outside and from stories and from just the personalities of the folks I know that come from there. That is just, there's like this incredible vibrancy and resilience, which resilience is a dangerous word, but in the best sense of the word. This refusal, again, to be reduced to the worst things that are inflicted upon that place or those people. And my grandmother, who was very dear to me, just had this sense of like porousness of identity. There was just nothing that she had that belonged to her. Like there was just this sense of like everything belongs to all of us. So my family is from the greater Gaza area, not the Gaza Strip, but it used to be a larger area, from this small village called Ibdis that was completely ethnically cleansed and destroyed in 1948. It was a village of about 400 people. It dates back to at least like the 9th century. And very small, like falahin, so farmers. And yeah, I mean, according to my grandmother's stories, she was actually the daughter of the mukhtar, so she's sort of like the village mayor, so she's big stuff. And yeah, I mean, they were farmers. They farmed. I'm trying to translate the names of like vegetables and fruits, so like almonds and grains and things like that. And yeah, in 1948 they were attacked first in February, and between the Egyptian forces and the villagers, like they were able to like deflect the army, but then they were overcome in July of 1948 and they were displaced. My grandparents specifically, some of them went to Jordan, some went to Gaza directly, others went elsewhere, but my grandparents actually sort of stayed as close to the area as they could. They stayed with some Bedouins nearby for like 7 years because they were so sure like any day they would go back, so why would they leave? And they wanted to like basically be as close to their land as possible because that land had been passed down for so many generations. And then when they eventually sort of started to have to, they had more children, they couldn't feed, they were doing sharecropping, and that was eventually like not sufficient to support 4 children, so they moved to what is now the Gaza Strip, and later into the diaspora further into Saudi and Jordan. So yeah, that's a bit about my family history, how they ended up in Gaza.
Thanks so much for sharing.
My mother's side, my grandfather is from Jaffa, which they had to leave in 1948 to Gaza, and now like Tel Aviv is built on half of the old city of Jaffa, and Jaffa was it's on the sea, on the Mediterranean, and was one of the richest cities in Palestine, highly educated population, owners of orange farms, and the city was, until now, was degraded over time, Jaffa, into a very, like the Arab side of the city. Arabs were kind of segregated, exactly. So Palestinians were segregated and held in one of the neighborhoods, and the rest who managed to escape to Gaza. There is a huge population of Jaffans in Gaza, and they still say they are from Jaffa. Like it's something that they feel proud about being from Jaffa. And so basically they at the beginning my grandfather was in Rafah. Actually, Rafah is also divided between Egypt and Palestine, and it was one place, but the borders. So my mom actually was born in the Egyptian side of Rafah, but it was part of Palestine then. So it's so weird on the documents. And then they moved to Gaza City. My grandfather was an English teacher. That's how they ended up in Gaza. My other family, like my father's family, are from the West Bank, from Burqa, which is in the governorate of Nablus. And Burqa has been experiencing in the West Bank attacks from settlers as well during like all this year and last year. So it's also good to remember that all of Palestine have been suffering, whether the displaced, the refugees, and the people who stayed and were technically not very much occupied, but they are attacked daily. And they were occupied and later became the Palestinian Authority. But yeah, so
your dad moved from, why did he move from the West Bank to Gaza?
My dad never lived. He lived in Gaza, but after
Okay.
Oslo. My dad and mom met in Cairo while studying at university.
Nice.
So
Yeah. Never mind. Sorry.
yeah.
Okay. Did you want to add anything else?
No, actually, I just wanted to highlight that, many people moved around, and it's just what I would have wished, because my father was born in Acre, which is now in the 1948 lands, but he is from the West Bank. But it was one place then, 1946, and just 2 years before the Nakba. And it was like a country where you can choose the city you want to live in. It wasn't a forced displacement. Like, so he was born in Acre, but he's from the West Bank because his father just worked there, like any other human being, basically. And now, even that, for example, causes sometimes like question marks when I am filling some applications, like, because we are super divided legally and administratively and everything, that the place of birth is just a confusing thing in our lives.
Right.
Not only the war times, but even the usual times where I'm renewing a visa or I'm renewing my passport or doing this or that.
Right, I know in some places you can't choose Palestine as your country of origin, so you have to put stateless. Right. Well, thank you for sharing. It made me think just briefly about, you were saying that Tel Aviv, part of that is built on Yafa, right? Well, I encountered a children's book about this child going to Israel recently, and they're like exploring Israel in this book, and they're like, okay, here's Tel Aviv, the city, there was nothing here. And this is what children are reading. So just really, really insane. Anyway, so we do know about the total siege that's going on, the siege of Gaza since October 7th, but there was already an intense Israeli blockade against Gaza that actually began in 2006. So if you could describe how the Palestinians in the Strip lived basically, since 2006, and if maybe comment on the extent to which UNRWA was part of the society there. We can have. Does anybody want to answer this in particularly to start?
Did you ignore it during that time?
Well, I think when we talk about the Gaza Strip, we have to really understand it as the Gaza Strip is a colonial construct. Gaza was a city like any other Palestinian city. It was a very prosperous city in southern Palestine. It's just north of the line where there's enough rainfall for permanent agriculture, and so would have a lot of crops and export things like barley to Europe and so forth up until 1948. And it's very important to understand that as a place, as you've heard, most of the people, Palestinians in Gaza, are not from Gaza. These are people who were displaced from their homes and their descendants in what is now Israel. And during the Nakba in 1948, when 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly expelled from their homes by Zionist forces, a lot of the Palestinians in southern Palestine took refuge behind the Egyptian army as they were retreating. And the Egyptian army then came to control what we call the Gaza Strip now. And that area then became this colonial construct that had a very large concentration, the largest concentration of Palestinian refugees. And as such, it became a particularly violent place, a place of colonial violence, because you have this mass, a large concentration of Palestinian refugees who want to return to their homes. And Israel is trying to control and pacify them. And it's also a place of very fierce Palestinian resistance. And this did not start in 2007 when Hamas took over. Israel has been particularly violent against Gaza because of this particular situation that it is since 1948. And we've seen multiple assaults on Gaza prior to 2007. And so my first time in Palestine was in Gaza in 2011, when you could go to Gaza through the Rafah border crossing because we had a revolution in Egypt and there was kind of legitimacy to open the border, and that's the way I could go in as a journalist. And I went almost every year after that to report, and it's also heartbreaking to hear someone who's from Gaza can't go. And I can go because I'm not Palestinian. We both have US citizenship, but I can go because I'm not Palestinian. Palestinians are particularly excluded. So every time I went, because of the blockade, which got increasingly harsh, and especially after the coup in Egypt in 2013, Egypt is complicit in the siege on Gaza. It helps to enforce the blockade, and after Sisi came to power, this became much worse. They destroyed all the tunnels under Rafah that provided a lifeline to Gaza. And yeah, every time I would go, it would be worse. People are poor, more desperate, successive Israeli assaults. But there will always be rebuilding and life happening. But yeah, I think like if we think about what's happening now in particular, we have to understand it in a context of population transfers and what Palestinians call the ongoing Nakba, or the endless Nakba, which is the continued colonial project of land appropriation, expansion, and expulsion. And this episode that we're seeing now, this genocidal violence, appears to be an attempt to expel as many Palestinians from Gaza as possible.
That leads right into the next question, which is that, you know, since at least 2017, Israeli officials have spoken publicly about this plan to push the population of Gaza into an area that is less than half of what it is now, and, you know, other plans of full expulsion. But what do you think Israel's ultimate goals are? I guess we're kind of answering that question, but I guess speak a little bit further about sort of what Israel's ultimate goals are, not only with Gaza, but with the West Bank. Do you want to go first, Sharif?
Well, yeah, like I said, it appears to be through mass slaughter, destruction, and erasure, an attempt, or it's happening to make Gaza uninhabitable for the 2.2 million Palestinians that live there. And through a military-engineered humanitarian catastrophe and genocidal violence, to expel as many Palestinians as possible. And we've seen this push. I mean, hours after the Hamas offensive, Netanyahu took to the airwaves to announce the military campaign, and he said, "Leave now." Those were his words, he didn't say where. And then very quickly we saw these two arrows pointing southward towards the border of Egypt, and that's the corridor where Palestinians are supposed to go. And the situation we're seeing now is that over half the population of Gaza is in Rafah, the southernmost part of Gaza, right on the border, literally pushed up to the border with Egypt. And it seems that they want to push them over the border into Sinai. And this is a long-standing colonial fantasy. It's not new. Yeah?
Since the 60s, they were projecting plans on relocating Gazans into Sinai. It was rejected, like the project was rejected by the PLO, but now no one is...
Yeah, there was a plan by the UN actually in the 50s for a mass population transfer to northern Sinai. It was met with popular outrage and crushed in a mass uprising. After 67, there was something called the Alon Plan that was to annex Gaza to Israel. In 1971, 400 Palestinian families were forcibly displaced to Arish in northern Sinai, and the relatives of 12,000 Palestinian guerrillas were displaced to detention camps in northern Sinai, where they remained for 2 decades before being allowed to return after following a lot of international pressure. And we saw just recently, after October, leaked plans by the Israeli intelligence minister for the mass transfer of Palestinians to Sinai. So this is what's happening right now, and we're seeing Egypt build this wall. And it's this horrific situation where people are, like I said, some people are trying to crowdfund to be able to leave. And as we know, when Palestinians are forced from historic Palestine, they're not allowed back.
And so, just continuing with Egypt, Egypt has said it will not allow Palestinian refugees through its border, and as you said, has started to build this wall, this quote-unquote buffer zone. Talk a little bit about the complexities of that relationship. Like, for example, I think maybe some people are wondering, well, Egypt should open its borders for humanitarian reasons, but what if it opens its borders and then, and then really Gaza's annexed, I guess. So could you kind of talk about, you want to talk about that, Farah?
I mean, that's very tricky. Please don't take videos of anything about Egypt. I'm scared of Egyptians more than...
We can cut out this part if we need to. I understand. I'm half Egyptian and I totally understand the fear.
The problem with Egypt, there should be something called the question of Egypt, I guess.
Yeah.
So basically, I'm not very equipped with numbers and stuff, but what I know is there is a theatrical play taking place, like as usual. So we see the leadership saying we don't want refugees, and we don't want refugees because we want to keep their lands, like how Lebanon treats Palestinian refugees. They're not allowed to do anything because we don't want them to forget about Palestine. So they can't own land, they can't work as doctors, they can't. So Egypt is now doing something similar. We don't want, no, we're not gonna support this displacement plan, we're not gonna allow it. At first it was to keep Palestine and Gaza, and then it was because if Gazans came, the trouble will come with them to Rafah and Arish and like the Egyptian side and to North Sinai. And there are strategic security precautions that should be taken, and we can't do this to the national security of the Egyptian state. And then now, I think what's happening is one day we will hear that, it's for the Palestinians. We are giving them some land, and we will make sure they will not interfere with the national security, and they will be bound to that basically land. They will not be allowed to go to Cairo because anyways there are kind of many checkpoints along the way, and no one anyways can escape right or left. So so the plan is kind of there are some deals under the table and above the table and everywhere, and it's kind of as if it's like, what is Egypt getting out of this? For me, like as a like I'm just as an observer. So yeah, and just referring to a point before regarding this displacement, I think what's happening also is that unfortunately, because of the GoFundMe and the costs that Egypt are putting on the displacement situation, there is something happening as in like sorting Gazans into on a class base, or like who can afford to leave, who has a network, who is educated, who is a good catch to receive immigration rights later maybe, and what will be left in Palestine or in the Arish and North Sinai are poor Gazans who are not equipped neither with education nor with money to actually make a life. So this is kind of also degrading the intellectual richness of this population is. Mm-hmm. And you can't blame anyone. You can't blame the ones who are like Muhammad, right? Like who now wants to save his family, but he is like, he's very much he's a lifeline to connecting also journalists to Gaza and things like that. So if there is something happening there, but I'd like to hear your opinions too in all of this play.
I mean, yes, it is a theater. What we understand from reporting also from Amba and other places, which is an independent media outlet in Egypt, is that early on in October, in the opening weeks of this military campaign, that Egypt was being offered by the United States and other Western nations economic incentives to open the borders and accept a mass displacement of Palestinians. Egypt is suffering one of the worst economic crises in decades, with massive amounts of foreign debt, skyrocketing inflation, and on the cusp of default. So instead of trying to convince Israel to halt its military campaign and let in humanitarian aid and protect civilian life, they were instead trying to convince Egypt to accept a mass exodus. Sisi rejected this in the beginning. He trafficked in the language of the Palestinian cause, and he said Palestine is the mother of all causes, and we won't accept Palestinians being displaced from their land. This was actually met with quite a lot of support within Egypt and the Arab world, because it was a rejection of what is essentially a second Nakba. However, as that rings very hollow. As Farah outlined, they're motivated by national security concerns. They don't want a massive refugee population to contend with on their territory, as what happened in Lebanon and Jordan, and there can be resistance attacks from Sinai into Israel, and Israel's going to start attacking. And so this is what they were trying to, I think, negotiate the best deal possible, get as much money that they could before this mass exodus happens, before a breach of the border happens. And like I said, Egypt is a close ally of Israel. It coordinates very closely with Israeli security. And it allows, Rafah is the only border crossing into Gaza that's not controlled by Israel. This is an Arab border, and yet Egypt enforces Israeli policy on this border. It allows Israel to dictate the terms of who and what crosses this border. It doesn't have to. After this engagement, when the settlements were withdrawn from Gaza in 2005, there was a security arrangement that this was the deal, they have to coordinate. But they don't have to abide by this agreement, especially in the face of a genocidal campaign. And we also have precedent. In 2012, when Mohamed Morsi was president of Egypt, for all his faults and betrayals of the Egyptian revolution, his prime minister into Gaza under the bombs in an act of solidarity. Everyone that I've spoken to in Gaza since then has never forgotten that. And that war ended quite quickly, relatively, and it was the least destructive of Israel's assaults. And so that's remembered. And so Sisi doesn't have to abide by this. He could say, I'm opening the border. All this aid is going to go through. If Israel wants to bomb these UN aid trucks, then Israel can do that. He could allow journalists to cross into Gaza. There's a press blockade. Since 2013, journalists haven't been able even to get into northern Sinai since Sisi took over. I've had to, instead of, in 2011 and 12, I went through Rafah. Since then, I have to go to Jerusalem, get a press card from the Israeli press office, and cross into Gaza from Erez. Now that's closed. And we know what's happened to Palestinian journalists in Gaza. They've been killed in unprecedented numbers. I honestly believe that if foreign journalists are allowed in, they need to be allowed in, to shoulder some of the labor of Palestinian journalists, and also to be a shield for what is happening and to help in the coverage of what's happening. Egypt is not allowing that. Egypt is not even allowing journalists into northern Sinai to cover what's happening in Arish. Palestinians who are wounded and receiving treatment are being treated with such indignity by Egyptians. They're basically being treated like prisoners. They're not allowed access to a cell phone. They're not allowed to move around. You can't even go there to report that. So, for me, Egypt is increasingly complicit in this genocide. But it is in this tricky situation where if it does open and accept a mass exodus, then you are also complicit in expulsion in a way. But what's scary, and sorry, I've gone on for too long, but my last point is Egypt just secured a massive IMF deal. From a $3 billion bailout a couple of years ago has just been increased to $8 billion and has forestalled a national default on its debt. And this has come with a massive influx of money from the United Arab Emirates, and I'm worried that this is part of some deal. That now we will see, and they've created this penned enclosure, and that they'll allow for a breach of the border.
And just so people know, Gaza and Cairo, or if you could just drive from one place to the other, it would be like a 4 or 5 hour drive, not very far. And Sinai is kind of between them, northeast of Cairo, and it's already a very rough area that's highly patrolled. People from Sinai are thought of as very hardened, so that's kind of just larger context. But right, and then we can just briefly mention that Israel also tried to bribe some sub-Saharan African countries, like the Congo, to take Palestinians. But I do want to talk a little bit about the West Bank, because what's going on in the West Bank is I'm sure many people know there have been 7,000 people arrested since the October 7th, and increasing settlements, new settlements right now. They're trying to build thousands of new settlements. They're doing selling them here in America, and there's protests happening at those sales auctions. But anyway, and since Netanyahu came back into power in 2021, early 2021, there's been a huge spike in that, and that's why Palestine is already in the news a lot, before October 7th. Sarah, if we can hear from you, anybody else can tap in, but about sort of your take on how that all connects to what's happening in Gaza.
Sure, yeah, I think it's a big mistake and a big trick in, there's a strategic reason why people tend to think of Gaza separate from the West Bank and separate from 48 or, the settled land called Israel. But it really is all part of the same project. Genocide right now that we're seeing, as I think Sharif touched on, is really a part of a larger and like enduring goal of ethnic cleansing, and ethnic cleansing is ongoing in the West Bank as well. So yeah, before October 7th, Palestinians were killed roughly at a rate of 1 per day. And it's, you know, skyrocketed since. I think it's like 420 and counting, the last count, like this week, of folks that have been killed.
In the West Bank.
In the West Bank, 420 roughly folks that have been killed in the West Bank since October 7th, and that's like targeted assassinations, that's like raids on homes. So it's, I mean, I've been, in a way, there's no hierarchy, but in a way, it's sort of like more terrifying violence, because it's like one-on-one. It's like almost, it's just like so direct. It's like settlers or soldiers facing children, and in some cases point blank, or like sniping from across the street, and it's just like
chasing them in tanks.
Yeah, there's truly like no red lines in any direction. And something else that's a little bit different in the West Bank is a lot of these deaths are at the hands of settlers, armed settlers. So like, you know, Israel, there's so many armed settlers in the West Bank already, but they've been armed even further since, and basically been given the nod to, you know, it's like, it's open season. So I think, yeah. I was there most recently last March, so roughly a year ago, and it was really jarring to see just like how quickly the settlements have been multiplying. Over 700,000 illegal settlers in the West Bank now. 150, I think, roughly settlements. In the last month alone, 15 Palestinian communities have been displaced. So truly, it's just like, it's like, yeah. As I said, open season. I think Israel just feels like, in this era of like, I mean, it's hard to say increased impunity because there's just like never been a ceiling, but it's just continuing to test the limits. I mean, we've seen like gruesome new stunts, like going undercover as Palestinian doctors into a hospital and assassinating patients in their hospital beds. Like truly, I mean, I keep thinking that there's nothing left that can shock me, and then I'm shocked. So yeah, the West Bank is definitely, like, I have a lot of friends in the West Bank, and they're basically not moving from place to place because of settler violence. Even a year ago.
So they're besieged in their homes.
They're besieged, there's violence. I mean, I have a friend that was beaten up by settlers just on the road, like she was traveling from a farm back to her home in Ramallah. Well, her boyfriend was beaten up, but I mean, yeah, I was there a year ago, and I was speaking with someone in the Palestinian establishment, like a very high-up official. His name is Farah Barqawi, and I asked him, as an American journalist, like, what is the #1 issue that you think isn't being talked about enough in the media, in the West Bank in particular? And he said settler violence. You know, I mean, not to say it's less important than any other issue, but he just said, like, it was so acute even then. And again, so these are just folks that are there illegally armed, and they know they can kill Palestinian children, women, men, and yeah. And then as well as, you know, you mentioned 7,000 arrests or illegal, you know, arbitrary detention without cause, trial. You know, sometimes, you know, it's hard to even tell the reasons sometimes. There are seldom reasons given, but some of them can be as petty or trite as liking the wrong thing on social media.
I watched a story of a 16-year-old young woman who was held for over a year and badly abused. She had posted up the Palestinian flag.
Yeah. So yeah, the situation in the West Bank is really dire too, and there's like a sense that it could escalate at any time. You know, as Israel's trying to approach as close as it can to its fantasy of just having no more Palestinian bodies left on the land. I think there's just like no overestimating how badly Israel wants to see every single Palestinian disappear.
Well, there's this other scary sort of narrative, not to go off track too much, but that you see in Israel, and I've noticed it over and time again, of like the Palestinians will be our slaves, which is also another really scary, awful thing, but obviously there's already the classes really have been divided, but I guess it's important to talk about all this stuff. So, let's talk a little bit about the U.S.'s role in all of this, and sort of, I wanted to ask this question later, but let's ask it now. There's been sort of, you know, we've seen
all of this protest, and we've seen, you know, all this international condemnation, and we saw what happened at The Hague. But Israel, as you said, has like this like limitless ability to continue to offend worse and worse and worse atrocities. So what do we all think that it could take for the Palestinians to sort of beat this system? Like, does it have to be that the Western allies tell them to stop? Can the Arab allies do something? And especially like what can we do as people, and the support and the resistance to be a part of that? Does anybody feel interested in starting? I know that's kind of a lot to...
I mean, you mean what can we do as people where?
To stop Israel. How can we stop Israel? Sorry, I could just say really simply. How can we stop Israel? How can Israel be stopped? I mean, including anything that anybody in this room or any person could do, but yeah, how can Israel be stopped?
I mean, at this point, for me, having witnessed all of these like recurrent attacks on Palestinians and Palestine and Gaza and the West Bank, I don't think. I think we have to see things on a micro and a macro level, or on a marginal or incremental change, and on a macro level. So on a macro, what we will see at some point, we will see definitely a deal. So this chapter will end, and we're not the ones controlling it. But I think what has happened already should not stop them. What has happened to the people, to awareness, to people in the US and other Western countries empowering themselves with knowledge, because there is a lot of ignorance and a lot of denial and a lot of it can't be this bad like thoughts, and we have shifted from that. But what worries me is that everyone will go back to business as usual once there is a ceasefire, and this is what we should think of, because it's not how to stop Israel, it's how to stop ourselves from having amnesia over and over and over again, and those around us, and keep electing the same assholes, and keep like fearing for small like interests and individual interests over like worldly and the humanly interests. So it's important I don't think it's one solution, but it's a very localized treatment from the individual and every community. And for what I can speak of personally is not stopping, even me who is Palestinian, I sometimes want to go back to my life. Like, I want to go back to life, but I make an intention to not drop the thought of we are in an imperialist era and it's not over, and we can't just be happy with this like capitalist situation we are in, even if it's sometimes giving us some festivals and some stuff and some whatever, but
we can have festivals in an anti-imperialist world.
Exactly. So we can't just have this like forgetfulness over and over again. And for those who are further from the fight or don't have families there, I think this thing is testifying to the lack of human worth. If it's not like lack of the worth of human beings, if they are not empowered anywhere. So you have that here with Black lives and with Native Americans and Latinx, and it will happen all over again, and in other places too, in Germany, and even on an Arab level, in each country there is that. So it's just resisting on a daily basis, I guess. Will stop all of this, not only Israel. One day, we can't lose hope.
Yeah, I agree. We need a revolution. Is what we need, because all of these systems of injustice and oppression are definitely intermeshed. And I appreciate what Farah says about the micro and the macro, because either one can make you despair if you're only looking in one direction. So, I mean, I think that Israel just needs to become a pariah, whether economically or culturally, and I mean, it can be a cause of despair to sort of like look at the amount of arms that have been sent there, and the clandestine military and financial deals that have been struck just in the last 5 months. It's really horrifying. But I also know that there's never been, like you said, awareness like this, and I know that I can see that sort of like the facade is cracking, and it's not happening fast enough, and it's not enough to just embarrass Zionists, and it's not enough to have a few artists not give concerts there, and not drinking Starbucks, and all these things, they don't feel like enough. It's not enough. We're so late. And Palestinians have been betrayed so many times. We've been seen as like everything but human, bargaining chips, and just inconveniences and everything else. But yeah, I think what Farah is saying is true, that we just must not forget. And yeah, and I do have hope. I mean, the resistance in Yemen, for example, things like that are actually legitimate resistance. Like I dream of seeing more of that, and more people somehow, in positions of power around the world, gaining a conscience and putting some actual, like, I don't know, teeth is the wrong word behind it, but like actually like counting the cost and making sacrifices for the cause of justice, and understanding that like what we allow to happen in Gaza right now is like creating new lines. And one day some of us who aren't Palestinian will be on the other side of that lines, just because we're American today or we're here in New York and we feel like nothing happening in Gaza. I mean, now the National Guard is like searching people getting on the subway. Like, I mean, the trade between like the NYPD and Israel, like it's here, it is real. Like it is real, it is real. We need to think of these things as connected. There's like a selfish reason for people to see these struggles as connected as well. Yeah, and I guess, yeah, I'll stop there.
One thing that I was thinking of when you talked about settler violence is that it is exactly what's here, like the gun issues here, like gun control. Everyone is like gun control. It's most of these settlers are from Brooklyn, literally.
I know.
And
Yeah.
they went like gun is in the system. The gun is not a thing we don't think of. Like they think it's part of your accessories. People go to shopping malls, and for 1948, women and men go buy things and in civil dress, but are carrying a gun, pushing a baby stroller and carrying a gun.
Yeah, we've been seeing pictures of like young Israeli women, like young women or whoever, young people walking around, looking like normal, like kind of hip kids or whatever, and then they have this huge gun.
Yeah,
And they're just at the grocery store, at the beach. Well, not in New York,
we don't see it on the street here, but it happens. Exactly. You can enter a shop in another state and just buy a gun and leave and shoot children in a school. And people here, only then, I think, only those people feel that pain or that threat. But it is there. So maybe if something, it's kind of exported. Some things are, like the US mirrors also to the world. So for US people, this is a fight on the local level, really, that might mirror something like, or exported in a positive way once things are fixed in a way here. It's not just fixing other issues and staying in the soup mix here.
Right, because the world is globalized, imperialist, everything ricochets, it's not separated.
Yeah.
There's fights for liberation. Here they empower fights.
Yeah, it echoes.
I'd just like to add briefly, I think, yes, I mean, we're seeing unprecedented, or in our lifetimes, levels of violence in Palestine, but we're also seeing unprecedented levels of solidarity in this country for Palestine. I've never seen this much outpouring of protest and solidarity with Palestine. And I think we're seeing one of the most, a moment that is an internationalist moment on the American left more than we've seen in decades. And I think there's also an understanding now that's very different as to before Palestine solidarity. It's not just anti-occupation. It's an understanding that Zionism is a settler colonial ideology, and it's challenging Zionism itself. And I think that there was something that happened with the George Floyd protests in this country and around the world, that then you had the Unity Uprising in 2021, and there's a real generational shift where people understand and can see very clearly who's the colonized and who's the colonizer, who's the oppressed and who's the oppressor. And those distinctions are being made. And I think there's also an understanding, because it's increasingly being talked about, as Palestinians have talked about for decades, in a settler colonial ideology. Every settler colonial project has a metropole. And part of the war of independence in Algeria was won in Paris. And the metropole of Israel's settler colonial project is New York and DC. And I think people understand that. And part of the war has to be fought here. There is always the fear that once this level of genocidal violence stops, that everyone is going to kind of, go back to life as normal. And yes, I think there's also an understanding that Palestine, it's more fragile, this understanding. It's not just some distant conflict that's far away, but it's actually the future that awaits all of us if we don't stand up to this. It's kind of the nexus of forces of control, where these tools, these algorithms, these weapons, methods of surveillance are tested on Palestinian bodies and then exported abroad. And that's why there's such a vested interest by countries like India and Hungary and the United States and places which have repressive governments that fund Israel and use these technologies on their own populations. So I think these connections are increasingly being made. And so it's a very interesting moment, actually. And as dark as it is right now, a source of hope.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder if, it's going to become harder to ignore. I think it will become, I foresee that it will become harder to ignore things as life goes on in the coming years. But yeah, so let's talk about the resistance. Actually, yesterday I saw, I can't say it was heartening, but it was incredible. Children in Gaza holding a protest, carrying, some deceased and marching and demanding an end to the war before Ramadan. For anybody that doesn't know the siege of Rafah, that they're saying Israel is going to go in on March 10th, which is the first day of Ramadan. And recently also Al Jazeera did a story on how Palestinians now that have been displaced within Gaza are keeping their keys to their homes, but that's also a long time sort of symbol of resistance, that they will return back to their land. Resistance is very much so fully part of the Palestinian people. But let's assess Palestinian resistance, not only in Palestine, not only in Gaza, the West Bank, in New York City. Like you said, it's kind of like this mirror power centers and beyond. Around the world, right? We've seen continuous massive protests. So assess that, and also maybe if any of you have any ideas of how we can continue to stay active.
We have our keys, literally or figuratively, and the land is still such a strong call. So the resistance is reflexive for some of us. Strategy is another thing, but the impulse to resist, I think, is just unconquerable. But strategically, Sharif mentioned this internationalist moment, and that is something that I think about a lot, that there's so many more of us than them, if us is defined by the colonized or formerly colonized, the global south, or the disenfranchised by capitalism and all of those things. So, but these are big words and these are big ideas, and people are dying every day. So, again, the macro and the micro come to mind. So, I think the resistance won't stop. I think about Jenin a year ago, before October 7th, how there were young men who were, joining armed resistance, knowing that there's a high likelihood that they would be killed. The West Bank, every Palestinian city is surrounded by
It's like 200 something towns surrounded by 600 something checkpoints.
Yeah. So the odds just are really stacked against them, and yet like this is how some people, young people, are choosing to spend their lives or risk their lives. And these are not people who necessarily remember the homes that those keys go to, but it's just like, again, with media and technology, talk about things not being possible to ignore. Like, Palestinians also know what they deserve because they can see the world outside. There's like the ability through social media, and like there's this, a lot has been said about the current young generation of Palestinians in all parts of Palestine who just are refusing to take what they're being given, whether it's occupation or siege or colonization. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's more of an abstract answer to your question, but it's what came to mind.
Yeah, it's also a very thin line between, like, as we said before, romanticizing survival and celebrating resistance, and in a way, I would guess anyone who is their life is put on the line, they will fight back until they will cope somehow. We are, after all, instinctive animals, or people, like humans, like breed. So this is what's happening on the ground now in Gaza. People are, if they bury martyrs, but they want to eat. The next, like, those who are alive need to eat, and despite that they just buried their martyrs, and the ones who are alive deserve attention because the deceased are deceased. So it's kind of, people like to say it, we teach life, fine, but it is also, it is one coin, but it is also what is left for us. So it's kind of, it is resistance on a daily level for those there, and it is survival, and it is choices sometimes made for those who can make them. For us here too, like, who have families there, like, it is also a choice and a no-choice. Like, I don't have a choice on how I choose to spend my day since October, because I have family there, and my only purpose now is to be of use to them and to help them resist. So it's kind of like layers of resistance. And those who are around me, even resistance, I mean, can be in the simplest things, and not only Palestinians, but my friends here who are supporting me to be able to support are resisting as well, like helping me resist. And some people don't see these things. Some people don't get in touch saying, I'm embarrassed, I don't know what to say. And I'm like, I don't want anything to be said. I don't also know what to say, but I need to be able to stay awake sometimes, to be able to pick a call. So if, like, any support and solidarity like that is helping one Palestinian go through one more day without falling apart, is resistance and is making a difference. So whether in Palestine, in the West Bank, here, these many resistances are continuous, I think, and should continue in that sense. And this is not to talk about the big word resistance, or those who put their lives on the line. I love this black woman from Atlanta. She represents me. She was asked if she condemns the arson accident for the police motorcycles like 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, and she said, I don't condemn that. God bless them. God bless who were able to do that. I have kids, I can't do it myself, but God bless who took the risk and did it. And so every one of us, like, but she was there to say that, and that's resistance for me also. So, and it helped me, like understand different roles.
I'll just say one short thing is that, at least for many people in my generation, Arabs, but non-Arabs too, Palestine is what politicized me. And what got me involved in politics, it got me involved in, if you can call it resistance, or just, I feel like Palestine is a way of guiding for people to make ethical choices and to counter different forms of oppression. Palestine kind of makes it very raw and naked when you have to make a decision, even if it comes at a personal cost to you, what the right decision to do is. But at the same time, you then bear witness to incredible oppression and violence. It's maybe not subject to you, but you see it. And so in that way, someone once wrote, I think it was Mustafa Bayoumi, that Palestine will save your soul, but it will also break your heart. But yeah, I think that's the way a lot of people, why Palestine reverberates across the world, in the global south especially. It's a 19th and 20th century colonial project that's happening in the 21st, and all these places that are in post-colonial
And I think it reminds a lot of
situations
people.
yeah, of course. And it's kind of like the rawest form of what a lot of us face in different ways.
Reading, where we can be looking, and anything that we could do to pressure mainstream media. But I think it's more like, how can we build outside of mainstream media? Not reform it. Sharif, do you want to start on that one? Because yeah, please.
I mean, it's a very big question. I think in no other issue is the biases and of mainstream media in this country reflected so nakedly.
Yeah.
We see it more subtly in a lot of other things and coverage just in general of economics and so forth, but on Palestine it's so bare. I'm sure we've all seen the New York Times and its big weaponization of rape allegation, but that's just kind of like a very obvious article. But in almost everything that you read of the Times, the rhetorical acrobatics that they have to go through to not say, for example, Israel bombed a refugee camp.
Yeah.
The title will be, I remember one, it's just so bizarre, it was Explosion, Gazans say was airstrike, leaves many dead. It was just Israel bombed a refugee camp, Jabalia. So anyway, I think we're all seeing, it's being said that this is the first live stream genocide. Everyone's following different people in Palestine who are documenting the violence that's happening to them. At least in this country, there's been great independent media coverage. I learned the trade of journalism at Democracy Now!, and I think they do great daily coverage of Palestine. There's a lot of other independent media outlets that do great coverage, including Indypendent. I think this is there is a lot more awareness of what's happening, and it's reflected in the streets as well.
A good place to follow to see action that's going on in the U.S. BT Newsroom. They did a lot of protests, specifically protests, and us.
And I think one thing happened this time also is that many people are following Palestinian citizen journalists directly on the ground and connecting to them and remembering their names, and this is a precedent in a way, and it will last. I'm not big at all on influencer situations, but
This is different.
exactly, and I really, some of them are very also authentic and really down to earth and really trying to get the word out. It's not just because in every situation there is media that will benefit from and media that is trying to do a change, and also individuals. And we have to humanize Palestinians all the time in that way also. Like, this is part of my resistance, is that we have everyone in the society, like any society, and not everyone is trustworthy, and not everyone is doing everything they can, but there are multiples who are doing more than what they can every single day. And it's good to follow Palestinians and what do you call it? What is the name of تعلي أصوات الفلسطينيين, amplify voices of Palestinians, yeah. But not on the New York Times. Boycott Wardle.
Boycott, unsubscribe from the New York
I'm
Times.
sorry, like Wardle is cute, but boycott Wardle even, because not worth it.
No, I just think, just quickly to add what Sharif said, well, both of you said, just the blatancy of the bias. Like, I hope that, like everything else that Palestine is doing to Western consciousness right now, which is just puncturing whatever illusions people might have had, or just like really exposing institutions, and like you said, individuals, like people are just drawing the lines around themselves, and it's like suddenly we know that a third of our maybe social circle isn't as trustworthy or doesn't like want to walk the talk that they were, you know, reposting in 2020. Like, you know, things are being clarified. So I just hope that people's like healthy mistrust of institutional media remains. And yeah, I think folks are finding their way to Palestinians who are showing glimpses of their own lives. I think it's always most important to, just raise Palestinian voices first and foremost. And just like one other funny thing about social media and New York Times headlines is how much like the IDF is undermining like the US media's like attempt to whitewash what they're doing, and then they're just like posting on their social media like the horrific things that they're doing in Palestinian homes and bodies. So yeah, I think a lot of veils are dropping, not to use an Orientalist metaphor, but